The arrival. Desperate situation. The desperate aliens' blade-like fingers clawed at their chains as the invaders hauled them towards the blood-drenched altar. The Romulan girls shrieked for the miracle they knew would never come. That was when a human dropship split the smoke-choked sky. The savior. Laros, the captured Romulan leader, lifted her head at the sound, hope kindling in her eyes as a lone figure in black tactical gear fast roped down from the hovering dropship, assault rifle blazing. This was the human Carl Bailey, a battle-hardened ex-Special Forces mercenary hired by Laros' father in a final desperate bid to save his people from slavery and death. Devastation. But Carl had arrived to an apocalyptic scene. The Romulan cities lay in ruins, the population already in chains. The peaceful Romulans, lacking advanced weapons or combat experience, had been rapidly overwhelmed by the vicious Dreth invaders. Their civilization teetered on the razor's edge between slavery and extinction. Swift action. Carl moved with ruthless precision towards the enemy stronghold where Laros and the other captives were being held for sacrifice. The clock was ticking before the Dreth performed their twisted blood ritual to empower their dark gods, which would spell certain doom for the galaxy. Fighting through waves of snarling Dreth warriors, Carl stormed the ritual chamber in a hail of gunfire, determined to prevent the sacrifice of Laros and rescue the prisoners from a fate worse than death. New threat. But even as the broken chains hit the floor and the Dreth leader's corpse slid off Carl's gore-slick combat knife, the grim truth became clear. The forces Carl had just decimated were a mere scouting party for the main Dreth invasion fleet. Those warships would descend on the crippled Romulans in mere days, against which they stood no chance alone. A desperate plan. Carl gripped his rifle, jaw set. He would summon his fellow human mercenaries and train a Romulan resistance force. The Romulans would make their last stand, buying time until Carl's outfit arrived. It was a desperate gambit, but the only hope to save an entire alien race from being engulfed by the pitiless darkness between the stars. Training the resistance. Rigorous training. As the smoke from the battle cleared, Carl wasted no time in preparing the Romulans for the greater war to come. He spent long days training them in guerrilla tactics, marksmanship, and hand-to-hand combat. The Romulans proved quick studies, their lithe forms and keen senses well suited for the hit-and-run warfare Carl had in mind. Emotional appeal. During a break in training, Laros pulled Carl aside, her luminous eyes filled with pain. She revealed the true extent of the Dreth's cruelty. Beyond enslaving the Romulans for labor, the invaders were abducting Romulan women and girls to serve as sacrifices in their dark rituals. "My own sister is among the captives," Laros said, her voice cracking. "They are being held at a fortified base on the far side of the planet." A new mission. Carl's lips pursed. He knew rescuing those prisoners would strike a critical blow against the Dreth. Not only would it deprive them of victims for their vile ceremonies, but it would also give the beleaguered Romulans a much-needed jolt of hope. Planning the infiltration. That night, Carl gathered his most promising trainees and outlined a plan to infiltrate the Dreth base. They would use the darkness as cover, slipping past the perimeter defenses to reach the holding cells. As the twin moons rose over the shattered cityscape, Carl and his handpicked squad moved out. They ghosted through the shadows, bypassing Dreth patrols with whisper-quiet efficiency. The breach. At the base's electrified fence, Carl made short work of the locking mechanism with a localized EMP burst. Inside the compound, the team split up, placing breaching charges at key junctions. On Carl's signal, the explosives detonated in unison, sowing chaos among the Dreth guards. Blaster fire lit up the night as Carl and the Romulans charged in. They swiftly cut down the disoriented sentries and raced into the detention block. The rescue. The sight that greeted them turned Carl's stomach. Dozens of Romulan females, many just teenagers, huddled in filthy cages, their once lustrous skin mottled with bruises. Carl blasted open the locks and the Romulans rushed in to free the captives, draping them in cloaks and supporting those too weak to walk. Final stand. Just as they hurried towards the exit, alarms blared throughout the compound. A tide of heavily armed Dreth poured into the cell block, blocking their escape. Carl knew they were out of time and options. He shoved Laros towards the exit, yelling for her to lead the others to the extraction point. Then he turned to face the oncoming horde, a blaster in one hand and a serrated combat knife in the other. "I'll hold them off," he growled. "Get those people out of here." The last stand. The battle begins. What followed was a desperate rearguard action as Carl battled the Dreth, his knife flashing and blaster blazing. He fought like a man possessed, the blood of slain invaders soon coating the floor. But for each foe he cut down, 3 more seemed to take their place. Relentless assault. Carl's blaster clicked empty, and he hurled it at a charging Dreth, caving in the brute's skull. He fell back down the smoke-filled corridor, trading vicious knife thrusts and bone-crunching strikes with the relentless enemy. A clawed hand seized his ankle, and Carl stumbled. The Dreth swarmed him like jackals, pummeling him with merciless blows that cracked ribs and split flesh. A glimmer of hope. Through a red haze of pain, Carl saw Laros and the last of the prisoners vanish into the night. A faint smile tugged at his split lips. The captives were free. Then a Dreth boot slammed into his temple, and the world went black. Captured. Carl awoke in chains, his wounds roughly bandaged. The leering face of the Dreth commander swam into focus, flanked by a cadre of guards. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, human," the commander rasped. "But you'll soon wish I'd let you die. When the fleet arrives with our supreme leader, you will be the centerpiece of our victory celebration, a long, slow sacrifice to the hungering gods." Reinforcements arrive. The Dreth laughed, drunk on imagined triumph. But despite the agony pulsing through his battered body, Carl almost pitied them. They had no idea of the ace he still had in play. High above the planet, at the very edges of the system, the vanguard ships of Carl's mercenary fleet flashed out of warp, an armada of battle-scarred frigates and destroyers crewed by the meanest brigands credits could buy. Veterans of a dozen dirty wars, they owed Carl blood debts that went beyond money, and they had come to collect, setting the stage for a final savage conflagration that would determine the fate of the Romulans and the entire galaxy. The reinforcements. Brutal interrogation. Carl's head snapped back as another blow landed, blood and spit flying from his mouth, splattering the grimy floor of the interrogation chamber. The Dreth commander loomed over him, jagged teeth bared in a vicious grin. "Where are the rest of your forces, human?" the commander snarled. Defiance. Carl spat a glob of blood onto the Dreth's boots. "Go to hell. Battle in orbit." The commander raised his fist for another strike when the room shook violently. Alarms blared throughout the base. "Sir," a Dreth soldier burst into the chamber. "Human ships. They're engaging our fleet in orbit." Commander Jake Steele stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Retribution. "All ships, engage at will. Let's show these bastards how humans fight." Airborne assault. The mercenary fleet tore into the Dreth armada, plasma torpedoes and laser fire crisscrossing the void. Jake's lips curled into a predatory grin as he watched a Dreth cruiser erupt into a fireball. On the planet's surface, Laros crouched behind a pile of rubble, peering at the Dreth base through a pair of binoculars. A Romulan resistance fighter crawled up beside her. "The human fleet has arrived," he whispered. "It's time." Ground assault. Laros nodded grimly. For Carl. She raised her hand and dozens of Romulans emerged from hiding, surging towards the base, makeshift weapons at the ready. The Dreth were caught off guard. Laros led the charge, her stolen blaster cutting down guards left and right. They fought their way through twisting corridors, leaving a trail of Dreth corpses in their wake. Rescue and retaliation. Laros kicked down the door to the interrogation chamber. Carl hung limply from his chains, but his eyes blazed with defiance. She rushed to him, blasting his restraints. "Took you long enough," Carl grunted as Laros caught him. She pressed a blaster into his hand. Think you can still fight? Carl's fingers tightened around the weapon. Watch me. Turning the tide. Fierce resistance. They battled their way out of the base, Carl's expert marksmanship dropping Dreth with every shot despite his injuries. As they emerged into the open, Carl raised his voice. Romulans, the time to take back your world is now. A cheer went up from the resistance fighters, surging forward with newfound courage. Orbital assault. In space, Jake's ship maneuvered alongside the Dreth flagship. Boarding teams go. Jake led the assault himself, cutting through Dreth defenders with his vibroblade. On the bridge, he came face to face with the Dreth leader. Your reign of terror ends here, Jake snarled. The two clashed in a brutal duel. Jake's human speed and skill were evenly matched against the Dreth's raw strength, but in the end, Jake's blade found its mark, plunging into the alien's chest. Shattered will. With their leader dead and flagship crippled, the Dreth fleet fell into chaos. Jake's voice rang out over the comms. Press the attack. Don't let up. On the ground, Carl, Laros, and the resistance pushed the Dreth back, block by block, city by city. The aliens' once unbreakable will to conquer crumbled in the face of Romulan dedication and human firepower. Final objective. As the last Dreth warship exploded in orbit, Carl received an urgent transmission. His face darkened as he listened. Laros, he said grimly, there's a group of your people being held in a temple. They're going to be sacrificed. Laros' eyes widened in horror. We have to stop them. The temple raid. They raced to the temple, a fortified structure on the outskirts of the capital. Carl and Laros led a small team inside, fighting through fanatical Dreth priests. In the central chamber, they found a group of terrified Romulan women and girls surrounded by chanting Dreth. Carl's blaster barked, dropping the head priest mid-incantation. It's over, Carl growled at the remaining Dreth. Surrender or die. Brutal battle. The battle that followed was short and brutal. When it ended, Carl and Laros stood victorious among the fallen Dreth, the rescued captives clinging to them in tearful gratitude. As the dust settled, the full extent of their victory became clear. The Dreth threat was eliminated and Romulus was free. Celebration and decision. Crowds of Romulans filled the streets, cheering the humans who had saved them. In a makeshift command center, Laros approached Carl and Jake. You've given us back our world, she said. Stay. Make Romulus your home. Carl shook his head, a wistful smile on his face. There are other worlds out there that need help, other innocents to protect. New mission. As the mercenary fleet prepared to depart, Carl stood on the bridge of Jake's ship, gazing out at the stars. Where to next, boss? Jake asked. Carl's eyes gleamed with purpose. Wherever we're needed. Let's go. A new crisis. Unexpected distress call. Carl and his crew barely had time to catch their breath on Romulus before a new crisis erupted. As they lounged in a makeshift bar, swapping stories over drinks, Laros burst in, her face tight with worry. Carl, we need your help. There's been an uprising on one of our colony worlds. Urgent situation. Carl set down his glass, instantly alert. What's the situation? Laros' words spilled out in a rush. Separatists have taken control. They're holding hundreds of civilians hostage, women and children. If their demands aren't met, they'll kill them all. Jake leaned forward, brow furrowed. The Romulan military can't handle this. Laros shook her head. Not fast enough, not without massive casualties. Swift response. Carl stood, his heart made up. We'll take care of it. Jake, prep half the fleet for blockade duty. I'll lead a strike team to free the hostages. As Jake headed out to rally the ships, Carl assembled his team. He handpicked the best of his mercenaries along with the most promising Romulan trainees. In the armory, they geared up in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the mission ahead. Stealth infiltration. Hours later, under cover of darkness, Carl's team slipped past the rebel patrols and into the colony capital. They moved like ghosts through empty streets, communicating only in hand signals. At last, they reached their target, a domed building that had once been a cultural center, now serving as a makeshift prison. Rescue mission. Carl's scouts returned with grim reports of the conditions inside. "It's bad in there, boss," one whispered. "Guards everywhere, hostages crammed into every room." Carl nodded, his mind racing through tactical options. "All right, listen up. We hit them from multiple angles, teams of 2, room by room. Jake's ships will start their attack run on the rebel leadership in exactly 30 minutes. That's our signal to move. Coordinated attack." The team spread out, taking up positions around the building. Carl checked his chronometer, counting down the seconds. When Jake's first salvo lit up the night sky, Carl gave the order. "Go, go, go." They'd breached the building from all sides. Carl and Leros burst through a side door, immediately engaging 2 surprised guards. Carl's fist connected with one guard's jaw, while Leros' knife found the other's throat. Fierce combat. They fought their way deeper into the complex, the sounds of combat echoing from every direction. In one room, they found a group of terrified Romulan children huddled together. "It's okay," Leros said softly in their language. "We're here to help." As they escorted the children out, an explosion rocked the building. Jake's orbital bombardment was intensifying, sowing chaos among the rebels. Final confrontation. Room by room, corridor by corridor, Carl's team pushed forward. They encountered fierce resistance, but the rebels were disorganized and outmatched. Carl lost count of how many he took down, each one just another obstacle between him and the innocents who needed saving. Finally, they'd reached the central atrium. The remaining rebels had gathered there, using the last of the hostages as human shields. Their leader, a scared Romulan with wild eyes, held a disruptor to a young woman's head. "Stay back," he shouted, "or I'll kill them all." The final battle. A desperate gamble. Carl saw the fear in the hostages' eyes, the desperation of the cornered rebels. He knew there was only one way this could end without a bloodbath. Slowly, deliberately, he set down his weapon and stepped into the open. "Take me instead," he said calmly. "Let them go, and you can have me." The exchange. The rebel leader's eyes widened. "The human. You'd sacrifice yourself for these people." Carl nodded. "That's the deal. Me for them. What do you say?" For a long moment, the atrium was silent. Then the rebel leader grinned. "Very well. Come here, human." Sudden turn. As Carl approached, hands raised, the rebels began releasing their hostages. Leros and the others quickly ushered them to safety. The moment the last civilian was clear, Carl struck. His hidden blade flashed out, burying itself in the rebel leader's chest. In the same instant, Carl's team opened fire, cutting down the stunned rebels before they could react. Liberation. In seconds, it was over. Carl stood among the fallen rebels, breathing heavily. Outside, he could hear the cheers of the liberated colonists. As they emerged from the building, a crowd gathered, wide-eyed Romulan children pushing forward, reaching out to touch the humans who had saved them. Carl knelt down, letting them see he was flesh and blood just like them. "Heroes recognized." "Thank you," one small girl said shyly. "You're heroes." Carl managed a tired smile. "We just did what was right," he said, but even as he accepted their gratitude, his mind was already turning to the next mission, the next world that might need their help. Immediate crisis. Carl's muscles ached as he slumped into the pilot's seat of the mercenary shuttle. The adrenaline from the Romulan colony mission still surged through his veins. He rubbed his eyes, fighting off exhaustion. A sharp beep cut through the quiet. Carl's head snapped up, instantly alert. He scanned the console, fingers flying over the controls. "Jake, get in here." "Emergency mission." Jake burst into the cockpit seconds later. "What is it, boss?" Carl's face was grim. "Distress signal. Remote Romulan outpost. Pirates." Jake's eyes widened. Casualties unknown, but there are cadets trapped inside. Female cadets. Jake swore under his breath. Carl punched in coordinates, the engines humming to life. Rally the team, Carl ordered. We move now. Rapid deployment. Minutes later, the shuttle rocketed through space at maximum warp. In the cargo hold, Carl briefed his strike team, a dozen of his most hardened fighters. We goin' hot, he said. No mercy for slavers. The men nodded, faces set with cold fury as they checked their weapons. Immediate attack. As they dropped out of warp, the outpost came into view, a sprawling facility on a barren moon. Explosions dotted its surface, pirate ships swarming around it like angry hornets. Carl gripped the controls. Weapons free. Light them up. The shuttle's guns roared to life, strafing the pirate forces. Carl's expert piloting sent them screaming over the outpost in a series of bone-jarring attack runs. On the ground, "Breach team, go," Carl shouted. 5 mercenaries leaped from the shuttle, rappelling lines playing out behind them. They hit the outpost's surface running, plasma rifles spitting death. Carl brought the shuttle in low, touching down amid the chaos. He sprinted down the ramp, the rest of the team fanning out around him. Laser fire crackled through the air. Carl dove behind a wrecked speeder, popping up to drop 2 pirates with precise headshots. Infiltration. They fought their way inside, the corridors littered with debris and bodies. Carl's assault rifle never stopped firing as they cleared room after room. Finally, they reached a sealed blast door. Carl pressed his ear against it, hearing muffled whimpers from inside. "This is it," he said. "Stack up." Facing the pirates. Just as they prepared to breach, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The blast door buckled inward with a screech of tortured metal. Pirate shock troops poured through the gap. Carl's team opened fire, but the pirates kept coming. "Protect the cadets," Carl roared. He charged forward, slamming the butt of his rifle into a pirate's face. All around him, his men engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Epilogue. New beginnings. Relentless combat. Carl's fists and feet were a blur as he fought. A pirate's vibro blade slashed his arm, but Carl grabbed the man's wrist, twisting until bones snapped. He seized the fallen blade, driving it into another attacker's throat. One by one, the pirates fell. Carl stood panting, surrounded by broken bodies. Only the pirate captain remained, holding a young Romulan woman in front of him like a shield. Ultimate sacrifice. "Back off, human," the pirate snarled. "Or I'll gut her." Carl's eyes locked with the terrified cadet. He saw the blade pressing against her throat, drawing a trickle of green blood. In that moment, Carl made his choice. He lunged forward, faster than seemed possible. The pirate's blade slashed down, but Carl was already inside his guard. Carl's hands clamped around the pirate's head. With a savage twist, he snapped the man's neck. Victory. The cadet stumbled free as her captor crumpled to the floor. Silence fell. Carl looked around at the shaken cadets, the burning outpost, his blood-spattered men. "Let's get you out of here," he said softly. As the dust settled on Romulus, Carl's communicator crackled to life. Laro's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Carl, we need you. A research outpost has gone dark near the edge of our space." "A new mission." Carl's eyes narrowed. "What kind of research?" "Classified," Laros replied. "But it's vital to our defense against future threats. We fear the worst." Within hours, Carl had assembled his top team. Jake Steele stood at his side as their ship cut through the void towards the outpost's coordinates. Unending duty. As they approached, an eerie silence greeted them. No chatter on comms, no defense systems activating. Carl's grip tightened on his rifle. "Stay sharp," he muttered. As they docked, the airlock hissed open. Carl took point, boots clanking on metal grates, emergency lights flickering, casting long shadows. The team moved in formation, weapons raised. They found the first body in the main corridor, a Romulan scientist. Chest cavity burst open from the inside. Green blood pooled beneath him. "What the hell did this?" Jake whispered. "Alien threat." Deeper in the facility, they uncovered holding cells. The reinforced doors hung open, twisted, and warped. Claw marks scored the walls. Carl crouched, examining a discarded datapad. His face paled as he read. They were experimenting on some kind of alien species. Xenomorphs. Acid for blood.